Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is the Red Letter Disciple podcast, and my name is Zehnder, the host for it, but I don't host this alone. I bring in my friend, my good friend from Florida, Chris Johnson. He'll be here in a couple minutes, and we're going to welcome in studio today one of the most special people in the entire world. That's not an exaggeration. It is my mom, Sharon Zehnder. She's coming in studio, and so we're going to talk to my mom today, and she's going to help us. Our goal with this podcast is that it would challenge you and inspire you to be a greater disciple of Jesus wherever you might be, whether you're in the church or whether you're in your workspace or in your neighborhood. We want to challenge you because we want greater, fuller, and truer expressions of Jesus in this world so that Jesus can get all the glory. Amen. So mom's coming on to the show. We talk about the journey of being a pastor's wife for over 40 years and how her role as an aftercare director has helped her learn and now teach others and now us today about how to help those who are hurting, who are grieving. So what do you say to someone who's experienced loss? Equally important, maybe what do you not say? What do you do? What do you not do? It's a really helpful conversation because let's be real, all of us have loss and all of us have grief, and we know someone who's going through that. So she might also open up about a little bit about me as a child. If that's interesting to you, then hey, you picked the right place. Today's episode wouldn't be possible without our partner, our sponsor, Carey Nieuwhof, and his free How to Build an Influential Online Presence Mastermind. If you're like me, you create content, and it's fun to create content. It's hard, right? But what I found, actually, the more I do this, it's actually easier to create content than it is to get the content out, to distribute it. And so the world is massive. And so we create all this God-centered, Christ-centered content, but how are we going to help those if they never hear it? What strategies do we implement? That's what Carey Nieuwhof wants to help with. He has done this, and I've seen the course, and it's how he uses his content to help so many leaders, and he can help you as well. They have a free mastermind that's going to help you amplify your reach and your impact online. What I learned in this is I learned to identify and put more language around my dream or my target audience. Also learned ways to get them to notice the content that we're producing so that they can connect with us. We know we have something that they want, but how do we get it to them? And then finally, there's so many platforms out there. How do you know which ones are going to work well with your content, which ones won't? And so you're going to learn all of that. This free mastermind, you can go to influencekickstarter.com. Influencekickstarter.com. It's free, and it's from Carey Nieuwhof and his team, and I promise you, it's going to be awesome. So with all that being said, let's get to the in-studio conversation with Sharon Zehnder. Let's do this. Well, here we are on Red Letter Disciple. We got another guest in studio today, Mr. Johnson.
Yes, one of my all-time favorite moms, Mama Z, is here.
Yeah. It legitimately is my favorite mom.
Yeah.
It's my mother.
Well, I hope so.
I hope so, right?
I hope so, too.
Yeah, I mean, it's the one I got. So, no, she's amazing. And her name, of course, is Mama Z to a couple of us. But Sharon Zehnder, and really happy to have her on. Mom is a pastor's wife, speaker, and she is an aftercare director here in Omaha, Nebraska, at a large family-owned funeral home. She also, a couple of years ago, wrote a book, her first book called Crosswords for Grief. So we're going to dive into that, and that's probably going to form a good bit of our conversation to talk about grief and loss and how do we help those that are there. And so welcome to the show, Sharon Zehnder, everybody.
Thank you.
So wait a second.
She even got her red dress on, too.
I know. Thank you.
It's a match.
For the brand.
I did.
Mama Z, how many kids do you have?
3.
You have 3 kids, and you've got Zachary here.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I do.
Middle child.
Middle child.
Mm-hmm.
And Eric?
Eric,
older.
Eric's the oldest, and Carista's the youngest.
And she's the youngest.
Yes.
Yeah. So in the grand scheme of things, I know he's a good boy now. He turned into a good boy. Just an opening question. Out of those 3, where did Zach rate on how hard it was to raise him? Was he the toughest, the easiest? You don't have to name the other 2, but how hard was it to raise this young man?
Hard? It was not hard.
Oh.
Yes.
Yep.
He was a very good child to raise.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I had my rough patches, like middle school, there was the times that mom and dad said, if you continue to get more detentions, like we will not pick you up from school. You will have to walk home.
What were you getting detentions for?
I don't know.
All my kids were good kids to raise, though.
Okay.
So she forgets the detentions
part. To be quite honest, and I have forgotten any of the negative
Isn't that
things,
funny how that happens? It really is. Like, I remember when my wife had Kylie, she was in labor for 27 hours.
Oh, wow.
And it was awful experience. And I just remember thinking through the process, we are never having another kid after Kylie. This is over. And like 5 months later, Jen goes, so when do you want to have another kid? I'm like, were you not there in the hospital? Like, how do you forget those things? And good mamas have this tendency to forget the junk that we do.
Yeah. Praise God.
Yes, we do.
I think that represents the character and nature of our God.
Amen.
Very much
Amen.
so.
Amen.
Forgives our sins.
That's funny.
Awesome. Well, Mom, I'm really happy to have you. So when this is going out live, it's actually just a couple of weeks away from Dad retiring from 40 plus years of ministry. And you've been
bless him.
and you've been alongside of him every step of the way. And so I want to hear, I think we hear for a lot of times, and I know on the Red Letter Disciple, we've heard from a lot of pastors and get their perspectives, which is awesome. But I kind of want to just hear your experience of what it's been like to be a pastor's wife for that much time. That's a long time.
Yeah. Here's how I describe it. It's a roller coaster. And I love roller coasters.
That's amazing.
I do. Zach knows this. And, but you guys know in the ministry, it's the ups and the downs. And, I've been walking alongside Mark and been blessed to be able to walk alongside other people that have gone through the challenges and the joys of life. And that's a great gig that God gave to us. And I think, though, from the pastor's wife's perspective, one of the things that I would say, having worked with pastors' wives through Pastoral Leadership Institute, one of the things that we always worked on with the wives is being who you are. And I think that's one of the things that is very important. We had 3 key things: that a woman knows where her identity is as a child of God. And secondly, that she knows that she has that unique supportive role to her husband. Nobody else can fill that. And the third thing is discerning where your gifts and your strengths are to serve in the kingdom. And so every pastor's wife is going to look different because those are all different. But the things we're united on are we're a child of God, we support our husbands, and we're all gifted. Yeah. And so every pastor's wife looks different. And I've just been trying to do my lane of who God's made me.
I've always apologized to my wife because when we first got married, for many reasons, but when we first got married, I was like doing radio and she had no idea she was marrying a pastor ever.
Yeah.
And, so I decided, midway through my life that I'm going to be a pastor and go to the seminary. And I remember her saying, this is a surreal experience because all of a sudden now they're expecting things from Jen that they maybe had gotten from other pastors' wives. And she's like, I did not ask for this. This is challenging, so
it's huge.
And she's done amazing, but I always like, God, I'm so sorry. You had no idea what you were getting, the roller coaster you're about to be on.
You're right, Chris. There were a number of pastors' wives that were going through Pastoral Leadership Institute that had no idea they were going to marry a pastor because it became a second career, or that God just called them.
Yeah.
And it was huge because those expectations that can come from the church, can put you, if you aren't working on who you are, they'll put you where you want to be.
Exactly.
And that a lot of times isn't a great fit.
100%. Like, the old pastor's wife made us all cookies on Wednesday. Well, that's cool. She got good at saying no, thank God. But
that's very healthy.
It is.
My story is different because Allison, before we met at college, like she said, the one person I won't marry is a pastor, and yet she knew I was studying to be one,
and she didn't.
I'm just kidding. I don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, so I think though that the pastor's wife, and I think I feel that for Allison too. Like it can be so often there's expectations there that you can be overlooked. A lot of times they will care for the pastor, but forget how the pastor's wife feels. Even when like someone is criticizing of the pastor, like pastor's wife feels that too. And so it's so much a part of the pastor's job in life is the pastor wife. And so I've wondered, like, have you thought what Mark, your husband's retirement day is like going to be like for you? Like what emotions do you think you'll have in his retirement? Because it's almost like your pastor wife retirement too.
I haven't thought ahead about it a lot, so just thinking of that, I'm an emotional person. I know, I could get emotional just talking about it, but the highs and the lows, I'm sure there will be flashing back. Most of our ministry has been, as of recent at King of Kings, but I'm sure there'll be the flashing back of the different places that we've served. And I think the thing that comes through most loud and clear that I will be reflecting on is even in you guys know there's hard times, and the hard times is where you press in, and you find out where your faith is, and you find out who God is, and He's so faithful. He's always there. But you can't force Him on it, But when you see that I call it that different side of God's face, and you see where your faith has come through, it was worth it. And there's nothing else, that can get you through. Those are the precious things that, just build on the faith and give you what you need to be able to help serve others because you've walked it yourself, and it's the grief, it's the grief that can come up in the ministry that can be so challenging. And we've got an enemy that wants to take us out, so it's just remembering He's always in charge. And so I'm sure I'll be flashing through, some of those things, but God gets glorified in the end.
Yeah.
You brought up something that just kind of triggered something in my head. I remember when, the district president came to me when they first opened SMP.
Specific ministry pastor. It's a route to become.
So like you can either go to the seminary or you can take this online program. And they said, you should do this. And I said, absolutely not. I'm not going to ever be a pastor. And then they came around the next year and said, you should do it. And I thought about it and talked to my wife about it and did it. But I always said, the one reason I love working with youth. And I said to my district president, he drilled down on me. He said, why don't you want to be a pastor? And I said, because my biggest fear is that I would have to do a funeral for a baby. And I don't know if I could do it. Yeah. And there was other things, but literally that was it. And so I had just gotten ordained. And the next week, Pastor Paul and Pastor Matt, they were gone. They were out of town. And we get a phone call that a 2-week-old baby had passed away.
Oh.
And the father and had the baby, and she was sleeping on him, and he rolled over and she stopped breathing. He basically, that's the way it went. And they said, we need to do the funeral in 3 days. And I did that funeral. And I remember just thinking to myself, this is something. Like, this is exactly why I didn't want to do this, And the mom's in the front row and she's crying and the dad's crying. And I get through that whole thing and we're able to bring like an ounce of comfort, I guess, but I get through my biggest fear. And I realized, okay, I can only do this with God because this is terrifying. And I think about that in your role as an aftercare director. I think that's got to be one of the toughest jobs in humankind, doing that. And I'm assuming that you're meeting with the family, preparing them for what's to come, and like kind of a counseling role. Is that Fair.
let me clarify. I work part-time and I primarily work with the spouses after they have gone through the death of their husband or wife.
Okay.
I have some contact with families if it's a child, but because I only work part-time and we're the largest, mortuary, I'm busy enough with just the spousal loss, that, and so I don't work as much like with the little babies, but my resources for support would extend to any of them. And if anybody called me and asked for that, so I'm more used to working, with the older adults.
Sure.
But you can have a 30-year-old that, has lost their spouse too.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And that is a tough gig.
Yep. And I think that's your unique, like we talked about, pastors. Why everybody has different gifts and different things they bring to the table. And that's your unique niche.
Yeah.
There's been times where you've helped and you've spoken at seminars to pastors' wives and about leadership stuff. But that's been the constant the last couple decades, is being that aftercare director. And so I'm curious, I want to, go into that even more. I think, especially with the last couple of years of COVID and everything that it's done to our world and all of the loss that has occurred. I heard Rick Warren once say that in the midst of, this COVID, maybe it was probably about 18 months after it started, I heard him say that one of the biggest things that's going to be left behind in the COVID wake is a tsunami of grief.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, do you agree with that? And why do you believe that? What does that mean?
Yeah, I had heard that his quote for that as well. And I do agree with it. When you look at, there's different definitions of grief, but when you look at grief is that unexpected loss or the loss of a dream of what that's one way to look at it. Or another one is an intense emotional experience that's triggered by loss. Well, that's what we've been through. We're dealing with that unexpected and all the things that we thought were going to be natural and normal are not anymore. And so we're having to figure out, what, and for a while there, we're still coming out of that some, but it's still trying to figure out what is even normal. And so there's tons of feelings that go with that. And people don't know what to do with those feelings because it is grief. And so it's finding expression, for those feelings because they're real. And if you just try and, not express them or bypass them, they're still going to wait to be dealt with.
Right.
So there's a whole community of people all over the world that are trying to figure this out. And if you don't deal with it in the right way, it can come out in other ways.
Well, and you talk about how we've lost some things during COVID, and I think working with school kids a lot, there's some high schoolers that lost a year and a half of 4 years of school. And I said this to Zach earlier, but the extroverts were devastated and needed counseling, and the introverts were like, this is fantastic.
Right.
It affected everybody so much differently.
Yeah.
And I think that you said unexpected loss, right? And so that's what the big worldwide was unexpected. But I'm also in the midst of that, a lot of death occurred. And because of the way things were, some families weren't even able to have the proper funeral or delayed it for when COVID was over. And when is it ever over? And so I'm just thinking number one, it's hard to lose somebody. And then if you can't
either when they're passing away.
Yeah. And if you can't even grieve, or you have to wait and then bring it back up a year or two later, or
and you can't have a funeral.
Right.
We had families where literally they're on their deathbed. The doctor would say they're going to pass away in the next 24 hours, but you can't come see them.
Right. And so all of that loss is that's, I'm assuming, just stacking up and we're not able to grieve.
Right.
And so now we're left with this. And so because I think all of us lost something in it.
Yeah.
And some lost people, some, like you said, lost years of school, some lost graduation, some lost
jobs,
sports seasons, jobs. You name it.
Businesses.
So what are the things as you look at grief and how to appropriately grieve? We all have someone in our life that's grieving over something. So I'm curious, things that are appropriate to say, things that are not appropriate to say.
And just so you know, a lot of times the Johnsons will just nervously joke and laugh.
And I will do that. Totally.
And then you feel uncomfortable, but
Right.
at least you laugh.
That's your coping.
That's
right?
my coping mechanism. It's really insincere. Go ahead.
I like to laugh. I love to laugh.
But I think we just had a moment of seriousness with Chris.
I know that's totally true.
Okay,
Like
good.
in the midst
And
of
now we're laughing to cope.
I know.
with the serious thing you just said.
It's so true.
Well,
but how should we properly do
and
it?
the people that are the best comedians are usually coming from,
Totally.
they say a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And
That's why I'm so funny.
That's how. I'm not drawing that line.
No,
but
but you should. It would be appropriate.
That's good.
So the question was,
what are
how
things
do
you should
help
say or not say
okay.
in grieving? Yeah.
I think the first grief principle that I talk about with people when they're negotiating their own grief, is, kind of what I mentioned before. It's permission to feel.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we try to go past that and just, sweep it under the rug, and that's what that time was. And yet you have to be able to have permission to feel what you need to feel and acknowledge it, name it. Does it make you angry? Does it make you sad? And then feel through those feelings. I think that's huge, because sometimes we think that if we're feeling bad, that's not a good thing. But sometimes you have to, I say, vent it out, before you can, be real about taking some positive steps. I think that the second thing, is to just authentically listen. Now, not everybody's going to be a safe person for each person, but, it's finding those people that are, if you feel like you're a safe friend for a person, it's to be able to just really listen to them. And it's not thinking about what am I going to say next, or, it's trying to just get into their shoes and ask the questions. I can tell, or observations, I can tell that this is really hurtful for you. What, tell me more about it, or what are some practical things, that I can do to help you? Can I listen to you every week, or can I, just having those statements that you're observing and you're trying to be, it's being empathetic.
Right.
You're trying to have empathy for them, put yourself in their shoes so that you can try to even understand what they're walking through. And, in grief work, we call that companioning alongside. You're not trying to fix them. It's not a fixable thing. It's just walking alongside them and trying to be that safe person. Sometimes you don't even have to say a lot. It's just, I'm going to be here for you, and you can call me at any time. I don't know the right words. I don't have the right words.
Yeah. I had a friend who recently had her husband pass away. And she said to me after the church service, if one more person tells me he's in a better place, I'm going to lose my mind. And I think it's because a lot of times we don't know what to say, right. But that's, so I think that's a great question, because I think sometimes we bobble that, like by trying, yes, he might be in a better place, but that doesn't help me right now. I'm the one.
That falls into whether you realize it or not, you're trying to fix it for them. You're trying to make them feel better. And so often you may have a perfect verse, but it just falls on dead ears because it's not the right time for that verse. They don't need to be fixed by God's scripture.
Especially 2 minutes after the funeral. I mean,
So I think, in the say versus not say, I think in the say category, I heard you say permission to feel. And also just being a listener. So it's just positioning yourself with presence. Yeah. I think, right? Is that, and then
especially for the people that you're closest to. I mean, I think everybody has to find, certain people they're going to want to be safe with them. And then there's others that that's not their role.
And then in the not to say things, it was like anything that might just try to fix them right away. Yeah. And so that's where we get the line that, they're in a better place. Are there any other, because I don't think when someone says,
what are the top 5 bad things you could say to someone?
Well, right. But because I don't think anyone that's saying they're in a better place is like actually consciously thinking, I need to fix them. This is what I got to say. I think
No,
they just
they're
don't know what
not.
to say.
And
They're
I
trying
think
to be
that's
helpful.
They're struggling, and death makes us uncomfortable.
Yeah. And so is there any other, I'm just curious, like, because all of us will, and every listener will deal with this. Like, is there any other phrases that are like that?
Yep.
That like just come out of us that are like, actually, that's not helpful.
That's not helpful.
Yeah, I can tell you what people have told me, especially because, they're pretty open about, those kinds of things. And before I say that, though, you're right. When we're just trying to help.
Mm-hmm.
I'm uncomfortable with it, and I work with it. I mean, it's hard, and it's hard to know what to say. So sometimes the less said is better. Okay. And just even touching somebody on the arm, and I care, I'm here. This sucks.
I've said that.
Those kinds of things. So what not to say, though, some of the top ones, I know exactly how you feel. My cat died last week, and that's an extreme example.
No,
but when people try to compare their loss, it doesn't set well, and
which not to interrupt, but that's interesting to me too, because sometimes when you're counseling somebody it's not death, but it's helpful for them to know that you've gone through, like maybe it's a struggle or a sin, because sometimes people will look at you and be a pastor and think, and now I can relate to you. But you're saying in this instance with death, that's not helpful at all.
Well, I think there can be a time and a place where you share your story. I mean, maybe you'll just mention, I'm so sorry you're walking through this. I went through the loss of my grandma. But
I see. Yeah, that makes sense.
I can only imagine how hard it is.
Because you go back to empathy, as opposed to, I know what you're going through. It'll be okay.
And then you tell your story for 10 minutes.
But then you're talking and not listening.
They're not. They're out. They're not.
Right.
You're not helping them.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
I mean, you could make a passing comment that I've had a loss and it was hard, and I'm, but put it back on them.
Okay, so that's interesting. So don't say he's in a better place. Don't say, I know exactly what you're going through. Anything else?
Just throwing out as a lot of people that are watching this are Christians, throwing out the Christian verses, usually at the beginning, unless it's maybe in a card that maybe, is trying to put comfort in there. They usually don't come off well for most people.
Sure.
Even though we want to go there. It's not that you can't put a verse, but maybe put it in a card and the Lord brought you to mind with this verse. Those can be very helpful, but just to, throw out verses a lot of times.
Leave that for the funeral.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah, leave it. Yeah. Those things. I'm trying to think what else. I'm not thinking of any.
Somebody told me after I lost my spouse, I just lost my cat. I know what I may slap them. That would be so offensive if somebody said.
I know another one.
Yeah.
How soon are you going to start dating?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, and I know another one.
Oh my gosh.
They're coming back.
This one happened, and I still can't believe it. A couple, they lost their 21-year-old daughter, and their child's name was never brought up again by their family. Never. And they would have gatherings together at Christmas. They ask if it was like this child never existed. So
the mom and dad wouldn't bring the child's name?
No, other family. They wanted to, and they were asking for that, and other family just never. And that's something I want to mention, because the mentioning of the loved one's name, it's best to ask permission, but usually, unless if it's a safe person, you want to do that.
Yeah.
Because think about that. As time goes on, who's talking about them and who's mentioning their name? 2 years later, that woman still is remembering her husband every day. Yeah. But nobody's talking about his name. So sometimes the very mention of the name gets tears coming because they haven't heard it. And so that can be a gift to mention, or even to say, I know your daughter's name, was XYZ. Is that okay? That we talk about her.
Yeah.
And asking permission.
That's really good advice. I never would have thought of that, because sometimes it is 2 years past. I've had friends that have lost spouses, and you don't know if you can bring it up, but you remember the good time, so that's great advice.
And the thing is people think if they bring it up, they're going to make them sad.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the exact opposite. They may get sad because they haven't heard that name and it brings tears, but it's actually, for most people, it's actually a gift. And, if you're not sure, ask permission.
Sure.
Do you think, because obviously you specialize in the loss of spouse and grieving loss, death, does that carry cats? Does that carry the same weight in other losses? Like, I'm thinking particularly of the naming it. So what if I didn't lose a spouse, but I lost a job, or I lost, a year of school, or I lost whatever? Is it similar, you think?
The grief principles, I talk about, there's a big grief umbrella. Okay. And death is one of the biggest ones that falls under that. But other losses in life, divorce, a handicapped child, loss of a job, this pandemic, they all fall under those basic grief principles. And so the grief principles of trying to name what you're going through and identify the feelings that are going with it and finding appropriate healthy outlets for that. I talk about healthy grief versus unhealthy. And the unhealthy, it is helping people recognize, okay, here, I'm going to give you my 3 words. Zach, I think you've heard these. You got to be real to feel to heal.
So you rhyme and he uses alliteration. I see how the Zenders work.
Yes. You got to be real to feel to heal. The challenge is when you start to be real and you start to feel, if you've loved somebody, it hurts like the dickens. And who wants to hurt? Nobody does. So it's easier sometimes to try to go around those feelings, and you can. But what I in a big perspective, what that ends up being is the use, abuse, addiction pathway, which is unhealthy grief.
Sure.
There's so many things you can do to be healthy in your grief.
What is it? What did you say?
Use, abuse, addiction. So what happens is you can numb your pain with drugs, with alcohol, with gambling, with shopping, with eating. There's all kinds of things you can numb your pain with, besides some of what I just mentioned.
Sure.
Iowa football.
That is an addiction that leads to a lot of abuse, actually.
It's just not a good way.
Right.
But you don't heal.
No.
So what happens?
I keep repeating the same process over.
And I was going to say, you just end up you're going that circle, and so people get off the healing pathway, and then they get into this addiction. So you can either die in your addiction, you can kill somebody else, or you can get treatment. So if you get treatment, you come back to the healing pathway. You might have been on that pathway for 5 or 10, 20 years. I've had people that lost a parent and they never dealt with their grief. And then 20 years later, they're having other negative things, probably some of the things I mentioned, that they realize I got to get some help. So the grief waits for you to deal with it. And so that's where, if you give yourself permission to feel through it in appropriate ways, that's where the healing can come.
So a couple years ago, you became author, Sharon Zehnder, with the book Crosswords for Grief. So taking a lot of what you've learned, and then, of course, your love for Scripture and God's truth. Talk to me about what this book is about and why did you write it?
I just opened it up to page 125.
Just randomly now? Okay.
Yeah. I just opened it up for the first time. And at chapter 20, trust. I have loved roller coasters since I was a kid.
There you go. There you go.
I enjoy seeing the adrenaline high in people exiting the seats with their face excitedly thrilled from the heart-pumping experience. So Mama Z was telling the truth.
In the book.
Mama Z told the truth.
She likes roller coasters.
I think that was under the word trust.
Yeah, it was. It was.
The thing about that, I start each one with something from my life, and
each chapter.
Yeah, each chapter I start with something from my life. Not a lot, but the point of it is you wouldn't get on the roller coaster if you didn't know where it was going. And you didn't trust that it was going to go, to a safe place.
Right. Well, that's so funny. My son will not ride a roller coaster because he's seen the things where the roller coasters get stuck, And he's like, I'm not sure I'm going to make it through. That's I don't want to do this. Right. I still haven't talked him into going. Kylie's like, let's go over and over and over.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
And the point under that word is we know where our roller coaster ends. I mean, it ends with eternity.
Yeah.
So the ups and the downs of life, no matter how severe, with the grief and the pain, we know who holds that roller coaster together, and we can trust them. And so, but getting back to, when I got my master's, I wrote this book. I actually wrote it about 8 years ago, and finally put it together in a book a number of years later. And it was a research project where I interviewed anonymous grieving people and got the top 30 words that they were struggling with. That if you could ask God, or, what are you finding? And so in the table of contents, there's 30 words. The top word that came up the most was—
Can I guess? Oh, I was going to say why. Why? Why did this happen? Okay.
No, hope.
Ah.
People either needed hope or they were hopeless, so there can be forms of the word.
Okay. Yeah.
So for myself, I knew when I had gone through hard grief in life and tough stuff in ministry, I knew that the only thing that could help me the most was God's word and what he said. And so the goal in this was to help the reader under the 30 words, to see what God said. And I was asking God when I wrote it for that rhema word, that fresh word, that he would bring out. So I looked at the Greek, I looked at the Hebrew, I looked at the context to just try to put something together for the reader that would bring some of those concepts from God's word to them. But then I've woven in the 20 plus years of the practical stuff. So each word will have biblical devotional stuff, but it will also have practical stuff.
Cool. You mentioned the word hope, which is one of the 30 in there. Is there another word that has really spoken to you as you have grieved losses in your life? Yeah.
There's a word that I think has helped other people the most, but with that particular emphasis, I can get into fear. And so that's the word that probably, I have related to. And this was even in ministry when I was going through a fearful time. The 2 Corinthians 10, take every thought captive and make it obedient to Christ. That's what I have under the word fear, is that, Satan gets in there and the enemy wants to stir up lies, and the acronym for fear is false evidence appearing real. He wants to help us think things are what they're not. And he wants us to believe lies, to see untruths. And so what comes in with fear is just that principle of knowing God has the truth, filling our minds with his truth, and taking it captive to him,
and
obedient.
So many people, especially kids, they'll build the false narratives, right? And they're convinced that parents got divorced. I'm going to live with my mom. She's not going to make enough money. We're going to be homeless. And they've already walked themselves to the final step. And I just wonder how many times with fear, how many times do we worry about things that don't actually come to fruition because of the enemy and what, he's really good at it.
And I talk about that I use the scripture and I forget I think it's in Psalms about a stronghold, because that's where the enemy can build a stronghold that of what's not true. And so we have to break through those strongholds and make God our stronghold.
And relationships are so important in that too. Like having godly relationships where I can go to Zach and say, this is what and he can help me call out that lie. It's so true.
What about, I think a lot of times, typically after a sudden loss or an unexpected loss, especially in the church, and it's one of the beautiful pieces of the church is that we can super rally behind people that have experienced a loss in the moment, kind of urgent, which they need it, but then it can kind of like trickle off without intention. Have you noticed that, or how can we not just help them grieve right away, which is super necessary.
But then 3 months down the road, what do we do? 6 months down the road, they're still experiencing loss.
Sometimes I like just that initial card that's everybody sends. Sometimes I initially wait a month or two to send. That's just a real little piece of that. Making note of people that are significant to you, what those anniversary dates are, whether it's their birth date, their death date, anniversaries, those, and just remembering people with a phone call or a card or something, that I haven't forgotten. Texting, most people don't do that.
Yeah.
And that's really helpful.
Can you share a story of whether it was you helping someone else or another story of, someone else helping another person who is grieving, of just something beautiful that came out of it, or something that maybe unexpected that came from it? And because one of the things I love to do with this podcast is to think about and imagine, and I know we're in a world of sin and brokenness, but if we could get this right, life right, if we could get discipleship right, if we could get grieving and how to help people right, what does it look like and what difference could it make? And so, I guess, is there one story that sticks out of something that, this is a time a person, whether it was you or someone else, got it right, and this is the difference it made in that person's life who is grieving?
Well, the story I'm about to tell you happened with a person that's been grieving for a little while. So this would probably not be appropriate, for the first year or so. But I have someone in my life who went through the loss of a child, and she's been going through a really hard time. It was very unexpected. And she's a Christian, very strong faith, but had gotten into a funk, with her grief, and was frustrated, had been going through support groups and stuff. And her sister reached out to me and said, could you give her a call? And so I gave her a call. And one of the things that I had just read that day, I love to read about the persecuted church. And there's a devotional, I think it's called Extreme Devotions, put up by Voice of a Martyr, I believe. And it's different things about persecuted people throughout the history of the church. Some of them go way back to Christ's time, and some of them are recent. And I had read something that day that, just in my devotional time, that just really, touched me, because it helps me stay grounded, and that, we've got such a cushy life, compared.
Sure.
And so she was, we were just talking, and I felt like the Lord put the impression on me to read and give her the insight from this thing. And it really got through to her, because it was about someone who, whatever country this was in, they were trying to make a difference as in a country where they were being persecuted for their faith. And he was really trying to win this person for Christ. And he was talking about, even if my life was sacrificed, for this person. And so anyhow, I shared this story with her, and he was being tortured, but he still was wanting to be faithful to witness of God's love to this person. And so I shared that story with her. And I think, again, it was God's impression. I think it was God's timing to break her out of the deep grief, because I said, God's going to get you through this. And, even though it feels like you're not going to come through this, he's doing something in you that's going to make a difference for somebody else someday.
Yeah,
so you got to keep your eyes focused on, this isn't the end. He's going to do something beautiful in this, but you can't feel it right now. And that broke through to her. She responded right away to me. She said, I needed this. So that was a God moment.
I think, and I've said it before on the podcast, but I just love the idea that, I learned a long time ago, is just that nothing in God's economy is wasted.
Nope.
And so even these hardest times, these hardest moments, the deepest, darkest seasons, God can use those in some way, shape, or form. And it doesn't make it easy, but it is nice to know that God's with us and God can use it. And so cool. All right, Mama Z,
Can I say one other thing there?
I will allow it. I mean, I don't. I mean, it's my podcast.
You know what?
But you're my mom.
Yeah,
so I'm not going to say no to you.
You gave this man life. Go ahead. You say whatever you want.
So
we're even now.
Yeah.
So just to add to what you said, I always say God's a God of redemption.
Yeah.
And I have seen him take things full circle around in a way that I never would have dreamed.
Yeah.
Because he cares about each person. And so, sometimes just like these persecuted people that, and whatever we may go through, we may not see it in our lifetime, but I think we'll see it in eternity.
Yeah.
We can trust the hand of God.
Yeah.
No matter how hard it is. And we may not see it in this lifetime, but it's to draw upon that faith that I know who I believe.
But I want to see it in this lifetime.
I know.
That's good.
Sometimes we do. Sometimes we do.
That's true.
That was very good. All right. So I'm going to ask in just a second a challenge for you to issue to our audience. But first, hey, Crosswords for Grief. I'm not just saying it because it's my mom. It's a great book. If you want it, we're going to put the link to get this in the show notes, redletterpodcast.com. And what I've seen, I've been a part of a couple churches that have used this as a tool to help someone in their church who is grieving, who has experienced loss. So it's more than a card to say, hey, we're sorry for your loss, but it's a book that can actually help them longer walk through the journey. And so I think if there's any pastors or church leaders out there that's looking for a resource that they can give to, anyone who is experiencing loss or the death after a funeral, be a great gift. And so Crosswords for Grief, it's an awesome book. We'll put it in the show notes. But Mama, if you could challenge our audience, we ask every guest, practically to do one thing to grow as a disciple this week, what would your challenge be?
Can I add one other piece before we answer
Again, I'm not
question?
saying no.
You can do whatever you want.
Sometimes I'm surprised people are not aware of grief resources that are all over the United States.
Yeah.
10 different countries. My very, very favorite thing to talk about, I've got it in my book in numerous places, is www.griefshare.org.
Yep.
We in Omaha, we usually have 20 different churches that are offering Grief Share. It's in little cities, it's in large cities. You find it with a zip code.
Cool.
So now, what was your question?
All right. And we'll have that link in the show notes too.
Thank you.
The question is, if you could challenge our audience to grow as a disciple in one particular way this week, what would your challenge be for the listeners?
Can I have an inner and an outer, and you can
whatever you want.
You can decide what you post.
No, put them. Yeah,
okay.
You're good.
So the inner way of growth as a disciple, I would say, if you don't have a prayer partner, get one.
Okay.
Take steps towards that.
Yeah.
Whether it's just beginning to pray about it, asking God who, making a commitment to someone. I don't think I'd be alive except for we had intercessory prayer. So that's the inner.
Okay.
Okay. The outer, living out the discipleship life. Probably when I was 20 some years old, I had a quote that I got from Mary Kay Ash. She was in charge of Mary Kay Cosmetics, that whole company. And she had a quote that said, everyone has an invisible sign hanging around their neck that says, make me feel important. And I remember that. And I think that as a disciple who's living out Christ, who's in us, the challenge would be, making that practical, weekly, daily. Who are you going to talk to and make them feel important?
Yeah.
And it's not about me, it's about God through me.
Yeah.
But that can start a conversation. It may be, it may be a compliment, it may be something nice you say to somebody, but that opens the door for other conversation.
Cool.
Make me feel important. That's really cool.
Okay. She's the only one that gets to issue 2 challenges.
That's right.
I'm not going to say no. But hey, if you take either one of those challenges on, the inner of getting a prayer partner, taking steps towards that, or the outer of, I love that, eyes that say, make me feel important, and you make someone else in their world feel important. Hashtag Red Letter Disciple. Let us know on social or in the comments if you're watching on YouTube that you're doing it, and the difference that it's making. I love it.
That statement just really convicted me, because you know how sometimes you've got people in church that want to have your ear all the time, and then you have the person that actually might really need you getting overshadowed by the person that's constantly in your face. But that's just interesting because essentially that person might have a bigger make me feel important sign than the other person, but we all have them, right?
We do.
That's
You
really mine's
You
gigantic.
have a really big one with the sequins.
Mine is
jacket.
neon.
Yeah.
Make me feel important sign. It's a
You are
sequin
screaming
jacket.
it.
Oh my goodness.
Chris, you have been so kind to me.
I know, but it ends here.
I know. I want to say I'm your biggest fan.
I know. And Mama Z, when we were doing the Preachers Not Preaching podcast, Mama Z would always comment on everything. She always I got to tell you, I grew up with my grandparents. I didn't really have much of a relationship with my mom until I was later in my life. And I was always like, Zach would always, he never had a bad word about his mom. Always, I was like, gosh, it must have been so nice to have Mama Z, And so I'm just thinking in my head, I know no families are perfect, but this seems like a pretty darn good one. But on TV, it seems like there's a lot of perfect moms. Okay. And so I was going to quiz your mother tonight on this. By Insider.com, they have ranked the top 5 TV moms of all time. And being a fantastic real life mom, I'm just curious if you could guess. Some are very classic, and there's one that's a little bit more new. Okay. So let's play the Can You Guess the Most Popular TV Mom game with Mama Z. Here we go. Florence Henderson's portrayal of the always smiling, always calm and collected blank became the benchmark for all mothers that they tried to hit in the early 1970s. Do you know who that character was?
Florence Henderson. Okay.
She had 3 kids.
Cleaver? No.
She had 3 kids, and her husband had 3 kids, and they got together.
Oh, yes. The Brady Bunch.
Yep. Yes. But what was her name?
Don't know.
Carol Brady. Okay, half point.
I feel like if you get the TV show.
Okay.
I need a lot of hints.
Let's bend the rules because it's his mom.
Please do that.
Nobody else bends the rule.
I'm not letting her walk out.
You don't want to just write the games from now on?
All right. Have you ever had a guest hit the buzzer?
On me?
Yes.
We had to eliminate the buzzers. Too many people thought they were annoying.
Oh.
All right. Let's see. Now, this one, I don't know if you're going to get this one. She was married to Archie in the 1970s.
Edith.
There you go.
Edith Bunker.
You know the show?
I do.
What is this? For another point.
Oh, shoot.
Mm-hmm.
The name of the show, Edith Bunker.
Oh, swear the days.
Wow, that was...
I know, it was horrible.
That was pretty good.
Thank you.
Give me the first.
All
in the Family.
That's it. Boom, 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 boom.
Go.
By the way, I defeated your son in a parody contest today that he's still kind of bitter about, but I won't. Oh, maybe shouldn't have mentioned that. I don't know if. Anywho, here's one with the perfectly, I think the word is coiffed hair, and always looking exquisitely dressed, even when just around the house. This housewife became the embodiment, for better or worse, of what a 1950s housewife was supposed to be.
That's the Cleaver.
Yes.
Yeah, and the TV show?
Leave It to Beaver.
That's it, June Cleaver. Okay.
June Cleaver, yes.
So you're saying that maybe, oh, wait, this is going to be my last one, okay? And then I have a bonus question for you today.
Okay.
All right. This has been easy, right?
Just crush it.
Easy. All right. She was an accomplished mother and lawyer. For many viewers, this is the first time they'd seen a successful Black working mother on TV.
Wow.
And I can't say that. It'll give it away.
Yep.
A lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to know what this one is.
Her name was Claire. And
first name, yep.
Yeah, and she was married to
a guy that's gotten canceled in culture.
Oh, yeah.
Let's just say that.
That's Cosby Show. Yeah,
Claire
yeah.
Huxtable.
I didn't realize she was a lawyer.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, the Cosby Show. Man, we all watched that one.
Hey, Mom, if people want to connect with you, where can they find you, or how can they find your resource?
The book's on Amazon.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the easiest access.
Never heard of it.
There's
what
also,
is that?
Amazon?
That's the quickest one.
Yep.
They can also contact me with the information you have. If they're local, they sure can contact me locally.
Great.
So.
And we will put that information in the show notes too, so it'll all be organized there. And if you want to grab a copy of the book, connect with my mom, who's pretty awesome.
She is.
And super grateful. Love you. Thanks for being on the show. All right, y'all. Thank you for joining Red Letter Disciple. We'll see you back next week. Bye. Well, thank you, Mom, for coming in and having a good conversation with us and for, I think, being pretty easy on me. So I appreciate that. But you helped a lot of people. And so, hey, to grab any of the resources we talked about, the Crosswords for Grief book, to see the key insights and maybe even a few not so key insights from today's show, we always put together show notes at redletterpodcast.com. It's going to have all the links and everything right there for you. Again, we want to thank Carey Nieuwhof and his team for putting together a free mastermind, a free class that's going to help you build an influential online presence. And so to register for that, you can go to influencekickstarter.com, and it's free, and it's going to help you who create content get that content out even more. And so next week, we are bringing Eric Bramlett onto the podcast. Eric came on for about a 10-minute span as a guest cameo in episode 4 with Dave Ferguson. So if you want to do your homework, go back and listen to episode 4 this week so you're ready for next week. Eric, we have such a good time. He's the creative arts director at one of the most influential churches in our nation. And so we talked to him about how do you cultivate creativity? What does God think about comedy? I think that's a fun question to think about. Plus, Eric is known as a song parody expert. And so Chris and I both try our chops at writing a song parody actually about Eric. So you're going to see who wins the song parody battle. Is it me? Is it Chris? Episode's not only going to be helpful, it's going to be a lot of fun. So don't miss it. How do you not miss it? Subscribe or follow. Whatever platform you're using, subscribe or follow. And if you're there, will you tap 5 stars for us and leave a review and share with a friend if you think they would enjoy today's episode. So we'll see you back next week for the Red Letter Disciple.